Welcome back, everybody. What you're about to hear sounds like science fiction. It isn't. It's a piece of hardware the US Navy quietly tested, quietly confirmed, and then quietly parked on one of the most important warships currently sitting off the coast of Iran. And once you understand what it actually does, you'll understand why analysts are calling it one of the strangest and most consequential developments of this entire conflict. Here's what happened. Buried inside a defense industry announcement, largely unnoticed outside of military circles, was confirmation that a laser weapon system had been mounted aboard the USS George H.W. Bush, one of the aircraft carriers currently operating in the Middle East. Not a missile system, not a traditional gun, a laser, the kind of weapon that, for most of military history, existed only in concept papers and Pentagon wish lists. According to the manufacturer, AeroVironment, the system is called LOCUST, and during a live-fire demonstration aboard that carrier, it tracked, engaged, and neutralized multiple drone targets in real time, using light at the speed of light. Let's slow down here, because this detail matters more than it sounds like it does. A laser weapon doesn't fire a physical projectile that has to travel through the air, fight gravity, and get intercepted or dodged. It fires a beam, and that beam covers distance essentially instantly. Against a traditional missile, that's an enormous advantage, because you're not racing a fast-moving object with another fast-moving object anymore. You're pointing a beam of concentrated energy and holding it on target until whatever's in front of it stops flying. That's the theoretical promise of directed energy weapons. What's different here is that promise just moved from a testing range in the Mojave Desert to an active carrier deck sitting inside a live combat theater. But here's the problem with just calling this a cool piece of tech and moving on. Context is everything, and the context here is Iran. For months now, Iranian drone and missile attacks have been one of the defining threats to American ships and Gulf allies operating in and around the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Central Command has repeatedly confirmed shooting down Iranian one-way attack drones headed toward the strait, sometimes multiple in a single engagement, using traditional interceptors and point defense systems. Every one of those intercepts works, but every one of those intercepts also costs money, uses up a finite stockpile of munitions, and puts additional wear on systems that are already being run at a punishing pace during this conflict. That's the quiet math nobody talks about in the headlines. You can win every individual engagement and still lose the war of attrition if you run out of interceptors before the other side runs out of drones. That's exactly the problem a laser weapon is built to solve. Once it's powered and operational, its ammunition supply is, for practical purposes, the ship's own electricity. AeroVironment's own description of the system called it an effectively unlimited magazine running on an effectively unlimited power source. Think about what that actually means in the middle of a sustained drone campaign. Every traditional interceptor fired is a line item. It has to be manufactured, shipped, stored, and eventually resupplied across an ocean. A laser shot costs whatever it costs to run the ship's generators for a few more seconds. That's not a minor efficiency gain. That's a fundamentally different economic equation for defending against cheap, mass-produced Iranian drones that are specifically designed to be thrown at a target in overwhelming numbers. Now let's talk about why this matters specifically in the Strait of Hormuz, because the geography here is not incidental. The strait is one of the narrowest, most heavily trafficked, and most strategically sensitive waterways on the planet. A massive share of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas physically has to pass through it to reach global markets. Iran has spent months trying to make transit through that corridor dangerous enough to disrupt international shipping, using coastal missile batteries, fast attack boats, naval mines, and waves of one-way attack drones aimed at both commercial vessels and the American warships protecting them. Every American carrier and destroyer operating in that strait has effectively been standing in the middle of a shooting gallery, absorbing drone and missile attempts on a rolling basis for months. That's not the end of it either. What nobody noticed at first is that this isn't actually the Navy's first attempt at solving this exact problem with a laser. Naval planners have been chasing directed energy weapons for over a decade, going back to earlier laser systems tested on Navy vessels years before this conflict ever began. Those early systems worked, technically, but they were limited, experimental, and never widely fielded across the fleet. What's different about LOCUST is the pitch behind it. According to AeroVironment's own team, the system is designed to roll onto a ship and begin operating without the kind of expensive, time-consuming modifications that made earlier laser programs so difficult to actually deploy at scale. In plain English, that means instead of needing a specially built ship, you can put this thing on vessels that already exist and already need the protection. Here's where things get more complicated, though, and it's important to be honest about the limits of what we actually know. This isn't classified information Claude somehow obtained. This is public reporting, and public reporting has boundaries. The Navy hasn't confirmed the exact power output of the system currently deployed. hasn't disclosed precisely how many drones or missiles it can handle simultaneously, and hasn't said whether LOCUST is still physically aboard the George H.W. Bush today or whether it was a demonstration unit that's since been removed. Directed energy weapons also have real, well-documented limitations that don't disappear just because a headline sounds dramatic. Heavy fog, rain, and dust can scatter or weaken a laser beam. Extended engagements generate heat that has to be managed. And a laser is generally a line-of-sight weapon, meaning it can't curve around obstacles or reach targets it literally cannot see. None of that makes the technology unimportant. It just means the honest version of this story is a genuinely significant new capability with real limitations, not an invincible death ray. Still, even with those limitations, the timing here is not a coincidence, and that's worth sitting with for a second. This system was demonstrated aboard a carrier that is one of 3 currently operating in the Middle East. The first time in decades the U.S. has had that many flat tops in the region simultaneously. That's the same carrier group backing an active naval blockade of Iranian ports, the same theater where Iranian drone attacks toward the Strait of Hormuz have become a near-weekly occurrence, and the same conflict where Iran has previously threatened retaliation against American and allied tech and energy infrastructure. Put a genuinely novel counter-drone weapon into that exact environment, and it stops being a curiosity for defense nerds and starts being a real shift in how one side of this fight can absorb the other side's primary weapon of choice. Let's talk about the platforms this actually connects to, because this isn't happening in isolation. Patriot batteries, Aegis-equipped destroyers, and early warning radar networks have formed the backbone of Gulf air defense throughout this conflict, working together as a layered system that's already intercepted Iranian ballistic missiles and drones on multiple documented occasions. A laser system like LOCUST doesn't replace any of that. It adds another layer, specifically tuned for the cheapest, most numerous threat in Iran's arsenal, the one-way attack drone. And that's a meaningful distinction, because drones are exactly the kind of threat that's expensive to intercept with a multi-million-dollar missile and comparatively cheap to intercept with a beam of light that costs almost nothing to fire. That's not the end of it, though, because Iran isn't the only actor paying attention to what the U.S. Navy just proved works. Directed energy weapons have quietly become one of the more closely watched trends across multiple conflicts happening right now, from counter-drone lasers reportedly used against Shahed-style drones in other theaters, to Pentagon budget documents indicating serious investment in even more powerful containerized laser systems, designed specifically to intercept cruise missiles as part of a broader missile defense initiative. This isn't an isolated Navy experiment. It's part of a much larger and much faster shift in how modern militaries are trying to solve the drone saturation problem that's defined nearly every conflict of the past several years. So, what does this actually change if the pause in this war collapses and strikes resume at scale? If Iran leans further into mass drone attacks as a way of overwhelming traditional missile defenses through sheer volume, a system like LOCUST becomes exactly the kind of asset that reshapes that calculation. It doesn't run out the way a magazine of interceptor missiles does. It doesn't require the same kind of resupply chain that every other weapon in this entire buildup depends on. And it's sitting right now on a carrier that's already positioned in the exact waterway where this threat has been most persistent. But let's give Iran's side of this fair treatment too, because that's important. Iran has continued adapting throughout this conflict, shifting tactics, testing new missile variants, and reportedly receiving outside technical support that's helped it maintain targeting capability even after months of sustained strikes against its infrastructure. A single laser system on a single carrier isn't going to single-handedly neutralize an entire drone and missile program that's been years in development. Directed energy is a tool, not a silver bullet, and any serious military analyst would tell you the same thing. The real story here isn't that Iran's strikes are now magically obsolete. It's that the cost and effectiveness equation of defending against those strikes just shifted in a way that favors the side that can keep a laser powered up far longer than the other side can keep building drones. And that's really the tension defining this specific piece of the larger war. Everything else we've covered about this conflict, the carriers, the bombers, the troop movements, the blockade, has been about applying more force, more hardware, more pressure. This is different. This is about changing the underlying math of one specific fight. The fight against cheap, mass-produced drones threatening one of the most important shipping corridors on the planet. If that math really has shifted the way the early reporting suggests, it's not just a tactical footnote. It's the kind of development that could quietly influence how the next phase of this war actually plays out on the water, regardless of how loud the headlines about carriers and troop numbers get. So here's the honest, grounded version of this story. Something that genuinely sounds like it shouldn't exist outside of a military research paper is now operational, at least in demonstrated form, on a carrier sitting in the middle of one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Earth. It has real limits. It hasn't been proven at the scale this conflict might eventually demand. But it represents a real shift in how the US Navy can absorb Iran's cheapest, most persistent weapon. And that alone makes it one of the more important developments quietly unfolding underneath all the noise of troop movements and ceasefire talks. What do you think this actually means for the next phase of this conflict? Does a weapon like this meaningfully change Iran's calculus in the Strait, or is it a promising piece of tech that's still years away from mattering at scale? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want to keep tracking every piece of hardware, every troop movement, and every twist in this war as it develops, make sure you're subscribed, because the next update on this could come at any moment. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.